Philosophy has always been about asking the biggest questions, right? Like, what is truth? What is justice? But for thousands of years, it kind of missed a huge one. What does it mean to be human when you happen to be a woman? So today, we're going to dive into the intellectual revolution that finally started to answer that question.
From the very beginning, this single, profound question has been at the heart of everything. It's the bedrock of our ethics, our politics. It shapes pretty much how we see ourselves and the entire world.
And right there, that's the rub. The so-called universal human that philosophers talked about for more than 2,000 years, well, it was implicitly male. So what about everyone else? That's exactly where our story kicks off.
Okay, so to really get this revolution, we first have to understand the tradition it was pushing back against. For centuries, philosophy didn't just ignore women, it actively defined them from a male point of view, creating what one brilliant thinker famously called the other.
Think about it. We're talking major figures from Aristotle to Schopenhauer who defined woman not on her own terms, but always in relation to man. She was seen as what he was not, an incomplete man as the source material calls it, or some kind of eternally childish being, always defined by what she lacked. And this wasn't just a footnote, this was a foundational assumption of Western thought.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. In the 20th century, a new wave of thinkers took this ancient idea of a fixed female essence and just completely flipped it on its head. The whole conversation shifted from what a woman is to what it means to become one.
This comparison really shows you the sheer scale of the shift. On one side, you have the traditional view, a fixed nature you're born with, often defined by what it isn't. But on the other, you have this revolutionary idea that woman isn't some biological destiny, but a cultural and historical construction. It's all about your lived experience, not some pre-written script.
And this one sentence from Simone de Beauvoir, it basically became the heart of the entire revolution. She brilliantly separated biological sex from the social process of becoming a woman. She argued that femininity is something that's learned, it's performed, and it's even imposed by the culture around us.
So, if being a woman is a construction, what on earth does that mean for knowledge itself? This next idea challenges the very foundation of who even gets to be considered a knower.
The classical view, from Plato to Descartes, saw the ideal knower as this kind of pure, disembodied mind, totally unaffected by personal experience, emotions, or where they stood in society. But feminist philosophers looked at this so-called universal person and asked, hang on, isn't that just a very specific, masculine ideal in disguise?
This led to some powerful new ideas, like the feminist standpoint. The theory basically argues that where you are in society literally shapes what you can know. People on the margins have to understand their own reality and the reality of the dominant culture just to get by. And that gives them a more complete and, you could argue, a more objective view of how things really work.
The thinker Donna Haraway builds on this with her concept of situated knowledges. Now, this isn't about throwing science or objectivity out the window, not at all. It's about demanding more from it. Real objectivity isn't pretending you don't have a perspective. It's about acknowledging your specific vantage point and taking responsibility for it. And once you realize that every perspective matters, you have to start asking whose perspectives have been buried all this time. I just love this metaphor from the philosopher Michel Ladoff. She describes this work as a kind of archaeology, literally digging through the history of thought to find the real women and their ideas that were systematically silenced by the official story.
So this complete transformation of what it means to be and what it means to know, well, it naturally led to a revolution in ethics too, and how we think about living a good life and how we ought to treat each other.
For centuries, Western ethics was all about these big, abstract, universal principles: justice, duty, rules that apply to everyone, everywhere. But thinkers like Carol Gilligan started to hear a different voice, one that didn't reason in abstractions, but in the messy details of relationships, specific needs, and responsibilities. This was the birth of the ethics of care.
And care isn't just some vague feeling, it's a real practice. Joan Tronto breaks it down into these 4 essential parts. It starts with paying attention, then taking responsibility, then providing care competently, and finally, making sure the person you're caring for recognizes they've been cared for. By putting this at the center, it validates a fundamental human activity that was often devalued just because it was associated with women. And that's revolutionary for everyone. It suggests our moral lives are built not just on rules, but on connection. So, the crucial point here is that this is about so much more than just adding a few women thinkers to a reading list. When you put all these ideas together, they don't just add to philosophy, they fundamentally transform it. First, on the question of being, we learn our identity isn't some fixed thing. It's not an essence we're born with, it's a process, a relationship, a constant state of becoming.
Second, when we talk about knowledge, we see it's never neutral. It's always produced by someone, somewhere. So real objectivity means being aware of where we're standing and what our perspective lets us see, and what it might be hiding from us. And finally, in ethics, we get this powerful reminder that our moral lives aren't just about following abstract rules. No, they're grounded in our connections to other people, in our vulnerabilities, and in our shared responsibility to care for one another.
What this whole tradition teaches us is that thinking isn't a passive activity. It's a political act. It's a practice of freedom. It invites us not just to accept the world as it's presented to us, but to constantly question it, to deconstruct it, and to rebuild it. So the final question isn't just for philosophers, it's for all of us. What's next?